Okay, so this is Content Evolution New World, and we're delighted to have you with us. So keep going, Tim.
Hey, Mike, you had
Tim,
a question, I think.
yeah, I did, Tim. It's good to see you as always. Hi,
Hey,
Bruce.
buddy.
Hey, Kevin.
Good morning,
Um,
Mike. Good morning,
hey,
Kevin.
Hey, Bruce.
when thought you had about both kind of the engine developers as well as obviously the chipset guys, right? Who are looking at how do I create more demand for cycles on my chips? Apple in particular, I thought would be, especially since again now they control everything, on from the metal all the way up. That seems to be with that capability, the place where I could be seeing myself and as a module using the device's onboard power to do things like help me identify, is this really from Bruce or Tim, or is this an AI, or is this being able to use that for my authentication or protection in this new world? Do you see that as a role that the hardware guys, or in particular Apple, could be looking to do with the
Well,
chips as they
that's actually going to be more of a software issue.
sure,
But
but I mean
yeah,
but imagine the real-time protection I can have now
well,
with
that's
that kind
part
of
of
software.
that's if again, depending on who pushes the software layer, but yeah, they'll make that a part of the differentiation. Because if you can actually especially not only the identity but also the way of determining something that is AI created versus truly human created or whatever from a creative standpoint. Yeah, that'll be part of the model. But where the money's going to actually be to drive the PC industry, I actually think we may have one of the best years in PC sales next year as the AI PCs start to come out, because at least at the enterprise level, they're going to begin to see that the refreshing of the PCs, there's a new need to actually refresh, because you're no longer just refreshing it just because you want to get updates,
Right.
and it's older. You now want to have the technology in an AI PC there to be part of what you're going to do both at the enterprise, and if you're bringing in data from the outside to manage the overall AI computing process.
Yeah, I mean we had a little bit of a stall here because COVID did a lot of pantry loading, right? That everybody got something new. A lot of people who didn't have PCs got PCs. You're talking about a trigger event for a refresh, right? That is really different, and I'm I'm kind of with you that we're going to see some different functionality and possibly. What did you think about what Qualcomm came out as prototype technology for their AI PC?
Well, they did the same. I mean, they're, like I said, Intel, others were doing the same thing.
Mhm.
The whole idea, and I said this goes back almost 2 years now. When the next gen, when companies were, Intel, AMD, and all these guys were starting to forecast and think through the next generation of personal computing. But Qualcomm used the event in Hawaii, and Ben and Carolina from my company were out there, and the Cristiano was very, very clear that they have developed a mobile processor in the
Mhm.
new Snapdragon architecture with this new X technology to be able to play in the AI PC. They've been going after trying to put the Qualcomm chips in a PC for
Yeah.
7 years, and
Mhm.
they've not really had much success. And even though Microsoft has backed them that whole period, the reality is that just never really kicked in. Um, this one might have a little more play because Microsoft's actually creating dedicated Windows software for that particular chip. And depending on how well they integrate it with the next generation operating systems for a Qualcomm processor, and it gets support from, Lenovo, for example, was there, HP was there, and I don't know if Dell was there, but they've kind of committed to do something with this new Qualcomm chip. But if I was going to put my bet on where the volumes are going to be, it's going to be with both Apple and Intel.
So go back before we started to record this episode. You were talking about the performance that you saw in the new Apple. So
Yeah, I
unpack.
mentioned, and maybe Kevin, you can, if actually, I'll send you the link to Ben's column. But
Right.
we've got the new MacBook Pro with the Max 3 and 48 gigs of RAM. That's the test units that we were sent. And because of this whole question of doing more processing, AI processing or inferencing as they call it, on a PC, Ben took specifically 3 very large LLMs, large language model tests. One, and it's in the thing, and I don't have it in front of me, but one of them is, I think it was 50 billion data bytes or bits of data. Because when you actually look at the way that AI works with OpenAI and Bard and that, they're looking at the whole universe, and they're looking at inferencing tens of trillions of bits of data as a part of the inferencing to capture everything, right? And as I mentioned, enterprises don't care about the trillions of data. They care about the data that's just their company. And they have their own dedicated servers that have just their stuff under secure, right? Anyway, the way you test this and the tools that are out there is you can do anything from whatever the high end one was, these multi-billions of data points, as well as to even lower ones. Anyway, we wanted to see how the Mac Pro with this biggest chip, which is their best chip, would perform. And it did amazingly well. And I don't have the specs in front of me, unfortunately. But it was like in the milliseconds it was doing ahead of anything else was amazing. And then he did the same test on an M2 chip, which is the MacBook Pro 16-inch MacBook Air 16-inch. And you could tell the whole difference just between the MacBook Pro 2 M2 versus the M3 at the higher end. And the point there is that the enterprise guys are the ones who are going to jump on this, because let's say you put 5 of these string together to manage your and not only manage but constantly refreshing the enterprise data, because everything changes every hour and every day, right? So that all of your enterprise data tied to an AI architecture is always up to date.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I saw, now almost 20 years ago at the big, raised floor centers at Walmart, right? Was, they were beaming in the information, on, every 5 minutes, it was taking in a satellite feed of, now how much money do we make? Okay, well, that cash flow is going to allow us to, go and, reorder these things in our supply chain. It was very interesting how they were doing that. That was just with code. Imagine what that would be like if you were able to have that, with these kinds of systems and that kind of architecture. Completely different game, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. Like I said, I do think this may be an inflection point to push higher demand, at least at the enterprise. Consumers, this is not going to resonate with consumers unless you are in the gaming sector.
Yeah.
Because it makes a big. It's funny because normally when we track gaming more on the PC side. That's the demand. But these kind of chipsets on the Mac, and we haven't done any gaming tests yet, but the spec data that Apple gave us showed that it's actually a pretty decent gaming machine as well. So,
which nobody's written titles for that since 1989, right? Or 90.
Yeah.
Apple too. So I mean
Yeah.
I mean, expanding that beyond their smart, the phone business to the desktop gaming space. Plus, I have to think, it's was it about, was it 15 or more like 25 years ago when there was that moment where it looked like Apple was going to make a gaming device? Do you remember that thing, Tim?
Yeah,
What
but that
was it?
was in that was
That was like a
in
standalone. That was the pre OS X, pre Steve, Steve 2
yeah,
period.
that was
They
done.
didn't have they didn't have a capable OS. Yeah,
Well, that was tossed around in Spindler's time,
that right.
but it never, he went the opposite direction, right, where he tried to turn the Mac into a competitor to the IBM PC.
Mm-hmm.
Really destroyed the company,
Yep.
actually.
Yep.
That was during the era when everybody thought beige was cool, and it wasn't.
The
So
battleship design of a PC.
I guess, right? There was some thought that was ergonomically friendly to the eye.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, but how about aesthetics? Okay. I was ultimately able to, deliver some research that said, no, bezel reflectance and luminance, it's not actually a problem, works fine, right? You can make it white, you can make it black, you can make it in between, the focus is on the space that's being illuminated. Now we essentially have zero bezel, screen, so who cares? All right, Bruce, we're glad you're with us, buddy.
Well, I just sit and I listen to you all, and what you guys know compared to what I know, I could put on what I know I could put on a head of a pin. So I just sit and I listen to you folks, and especially listen to Tim's discussion about all this equipment. For me, it's just a fascinating knowledge that I'm able to pick up. So I appreciate it.
100%. And the other thread that happened earlier, which I 100% agree with Tim, is that it's the data that isn't available, right, in the public space, that only maybe 6 or 7% of human knowledge is available on the World Wide Web, that isn't in a SCIF or in a enterprise or some other protected mode or behind a paywall. And that's the stuff that needs to get organized, right, to provide some interesting competitive advantage. Is you want to get that stuff to start to manifest.
Yeah, and that's actually becoming one of the bigger interesting things that where AI can have a dramatic impact. Mm-hmm. Because it's your data that's important, not necessarily the world data that's important. Mm-hmm. And obviously, if you really wanted to leverage the world data, etc., then you've got the Chat GPT and others, and then you can use you can use their APIs to tag into that to even create your own application. Mm-hmm. But in the end, if you're whether you're a gigantic company or you're even a mid-sized company, mm-hmm. your data is what drives your success. Mm-hmm. And you don't want that. And that's why, if I'm an enterprise company, I don't want anybody coming and inferencing my data. I want to inference my data myself. And then I want the capabilities of the AI engines to benefit me, not ChatGPT, etc. Right?
But isn't there a corollary, Tim? It's like, on the other hand, if there's a trusted entity, and with the advanced capabilities I'll have with securing my data, taking advantage of the power, right, that the new products like Apple's talking about with the new laptops, kind of the corollary is I could also envision an entity, a trusted entity, where I would allow them to maybe not optimize my data like a marketing platform, right, but a trusted entity where I would say, as we've all long talked about, right, in the advertising world, it's like, hey, you want to compensate me for certain, regular extracts of my data, and use me to map your profiles, go for it. but I need
Yeah,
that trusted
but again,
capability.
you would only do that if it was in your own benefit, right?
That's what I mean. I mean,
And
but
if,
I wouldn't want to do it directly and code it myself. I think there are, whether it's a bank, maybe not a bank, but possibly a bank, since they are, generally insured and they exist by a certain amount of protection. I see that as, this next level version of a digital twin concept where, again, it's I'm doing it on my own volition and I trust the entity because, sharing my data is going to get me better service, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I see
yeah,
that, and being able to now
it,
do it safely and not having to like blindly hand it off to a marketing platform or a digital marketing agency.
yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll see that where they'll let the open AI guys give them access to
Right.
promotional materials and other things and feed that engine. But that's and that's actually important from from an advertising promotional side. But the running of the business part, they don't want
Yeah.
that data to get out.
And not only the data itself in one way is, clearly, you want to fence it off, keep it proprietary. The other is that the culture around how business topics are discussed at Apple versus discussed at Microsoft versus discussed at, Royal Dutch Shell is the way that it's trained, right? It needs to speak Apple,
Oh
or it
yeah,
needs to speak, Royal Dutch Shell and understand, their global scenario planning kind of stuff, or it needs to understand whatever, Toyota, right, for instance. And if it's generally trained, it isn't going to necessarily be providing the kinds of answers that represent the wisdom of that organization.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I do think that I think that the first level of focus begins right at probably at CES. We'll start seeing the push for the AIPC a bit more from all the various players. But we know a little bit about we know a lot about Intel's CPU roadmap for the next 2 years. And we know a lot about AMD's roadmap because we're advisory to them.
Mm-hmm.
The one that's a hard for us to completely stay on top of is Apple, because they don't talk to, well, they do, we do advise Apple and we're on insight on some things, but they never share roadmaps with us, so we have no clue where they're really heading with some of the stuff. But if you look at their historical perspective, you can imagine that an M4 is going to be even more powerful with even bigger and better neural engine, and the Max will take an even bigger role, say in 2025, on edge inferencing, right? And will be the same thing with Intel. Intel's biggest chip that's going to have its largest impact on AI inferencing on the edge won't actually ship until 2025. So
Right.
24, I think, is going to be the year where this idea will be solidified, where AI computing on the edge will be important. But I think the big push and when we'll actually see the industry go to at a refresh rate will probably be starting in 2025.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Mike was talking about banking before. I'll just kind of put banking and FINRA regulations and, medical and HIPAA as kind of kissing cousins in terms of privacy and wanting to, be good stewards of, customers and patient data. We've been working with this agent technology, which is based on edge, right? Where you drop an agent into the data set and you're, let's say I wanted to know what the blood pressure was of everyone across a 10 hospital system. Well, if I went and actually looked at the patient records and tried to anonymize them, there are all kinds of problems, right, with doing it that way. But if I just go in and pull the coefficient off, right, of all the blood pressure readings, because I can read that record, and then I simply send the coefficients with nothing other than the coefficient data into a master model, that is analyzable. It allows us to do some statistical work that's good for, population health purposes, and I haven't violated anything, right? So the fact is, we're playing with that kind of mini agent, right, to be able to insert into data sets so that we completely stay away from, ever seeing anything, right, that looks like a person, or an adjacent data set that if I had enough of those, I would be able to go back and find Tim, or find Bruce, right? Because now I've got, enough points of reference that I can triangulate back to your patient record, right? So we're playing in that right now in choice flows, and it's kind of fun.
I've got to ask a really stupid question, but so excuse my ignorance, but it really, how can you access, let's just say, a hospital's data records and pull out certain data without also being able to access other parts of that data or the information that hospital has across the spectrum?
You can never get, Bruce, you can never get patient data because of HIPAA. All of that is firewalled.
Okay.
But what the hospitals and the drug guys do is they produce a ton of information regarding tests and results and things. You never know where they're coming from because they're generalized. But that's where you can actually pull up the data going through the chat GPTs and the others. But as far as if you wanted to drill down to an actual patient, you can't do that.
Yeah, no, I get that, Tim, but I guess what I don't understand, and again, I apologize for just profound ignorance here, but if you can access a data set to pull out a spectrum of, say, blood pressure readings, and that you're gathering that data from the hospital records, what's to prevent you from accessing everything else in there? How do you do that? I know that's a stupid question, but
well,
I don't understand it.
You can't remember all of the hospitals and or medical facilities are firewalled.
Right.
Right. So if you were talking about getting the data of their the blood pressure readings of everybody, you probably even couldn't do that.
Right.
It would only be if the data was published.
Right.
For some reason.
So then what you're saying is that the hospital could gather that information in their interior of their operation, anonymize it, and then send it out to you.
Correct. And they can
They
can publish it. Some of them will actually publish it in medical journals, and all of those type of things are available. So, they actually go literally into the especially test results. They go into it. They go into medical journals that are part of it in the OpenAI LLM model that will go out and scrape that data from, for example, the way OpenAI works is it targets certain sectors, and it'll make the OpenAI inferencing engine, and they'll target it at the medical community or the automotive or whatever. And then it scrapes whatever's available publicly. But what it can't do is scrape any data that's private, because it can't get through that.
So I guess that, when I'm thinking about, again, we just focus on medical data because Kevin brought it up, but
sure.
It would seem to me that if a pharmaceutical company or a group of pharmaceutical companies were to focus and use AI to really analyze that data, that the output from that would be staggering.
Yeah.
The first place where you have less of a boundary condition, Bruce, right, as a population, are armies, all right, or people who are enlisted personnel in the DoD, they actually have fewer rights to their data, right? And so that's a more analyzable data set, right? Another group, right, that has that can set their own terms and conditions, Native American Indian tribes on their own reservations, right? With, whatever's happening medically there, they can, set their own rules. They're outside of those boundaries unless they're treated off the reservation.
Well, that certainly
It's
makes
just
sense.
interesting that there are places, right, where there are exceptions, right? And, if you'd like a completely unbounded data set, let's go to China, right?
Well,
It's all being compiled, all right, real time, right? So, if you take away the cultural constraints, right, and regulatory, non-North American, non-EU, there's a lot of stuff, right? We have examples of people who, through a series of signals, right, that come through the system, people are automatically getting their marriage licenses in India because, oh, we saw this and we saw this. Okay, here, you're married.
Amazing.
yeah.
Same in Pakistan. All right. There's some, and people are looking at this as a convenience as opposed to a problem, right? But would we?
Well,
it's a good idea. Maybe not.
Well, we've already made a ton of trade-offs, right, when it comes to convenience and
Right.
our data, right? So, and I think, I think this is true in India, right? The difference I've always seen between Europeans, Westerners, and other countries is we're more worried about the government, right? Whereas in most countries, privacy is because most of the consumers are worried about enterprises and corporations, right? And I think that, dichotomy is going to be kind of interesting to see. As we've talked earlier, I think, Kevin, will certain countries or regions not avoid, some form of centralized oversight of these AI systems? They're just not going to be held back, like you say, in China, or, for example, there may be a lot, leapfrogging in terms of group medical diagnosis and small group medical trend diagnosis than we're probably going to get here. Now, there's a lot of trade-offs that you make as a Chinese citizen for that potential benefit. But I think it's the more I'm all for oversight, but I'm also, as we've talked, Kevin, I'm also, and I think we kind of in general would agree, is but we also don't want to so over-regulate ourselves that we put industries and folks at competitive disadvantage.
We're going to be the recipients of some of because the largest data training set on the planet from a human point of view is that part of the world, is China and the, Asia in general. And there will be implications of what those language models have ingested as, behaviors and preferences and so on and so forth, that we're going to look at that cross-eyed and say, why is it telling me that? Right? Because it was learned from, a set of, answers that would look unusual to us. And in fact, if you move away from language for a moment and talk about like self-driving cars, all right, and so I'm going to recognize, what's going on. I won't say the name of the manufacturer, but there were some self-driving public vehicles that were designed for the Olympics that started to hit some of the people who were visiting from other countries because it did not recognize them from a stature and skin color and other things as human.
Amazing.
It was trained on Japanese, right, conditions.
I should check. I wonder if they shut. I know Cruise was it Cruise or the other one out here in San Francisco that
Cruise
got barred?
Yeah.
Got barred. And they're like, London Mayor Breed's probably going, glad that happened before the big APAC conference that we're having this week.
You
now we don't have to worry about it.
the first GPS that came in on Japanese cars did not work in the United States because they were tuned for the density of streets in Tokyo.
Yep.
And the minute you put it out in a cornfield in Kansas, it's kind of like, I don't know where I am. I don't know how to help you with with this problem. And it needed to be retrained. It wasn't AI, but it needed to be recalibrated for our road system, and it wasn't. Anyway.
No, I wanted, since it's been a while since we chatted, Tim, by the way, I thought your piece around this was prior to launch a few weeks ago about, is Apple, which I blogged about or posted on Substack, falling behind on AI. Where's my smarter Siri? I think I really liked your piece where you really kind of, I think, noted Apple's been using AI and machine learning for years in there. They're just not making it a distinct product. So,
Well,
and I forgot to send that kudos along. I appreciated that particular piece.
yeah, what was fascinating about that, and again, because I've been in the industry for so long, I actually learned about that, and I put that in the article. The first person at Apple who showed me they were working on AI was Kai-Fu Lee.
Yep.
I don't know if guys know who Kai-Fu Lee is, but he is one of the top AI scientists in the world. And in fact, he was with Apple for 2 years working on this AI project, and then Bill Gates swiped him and took him over to Microsoft, and he ran a big part of Microsoft's internal research. And then when Microsoft decided they wanted to expand in China, Kai-Fu Lee went over to China and ran Microsoft's China business. But yeah, it goes back to the early AI work. And plus, if you actually look at the original Knowledge Navigator that Scully brought out with Alan Kay, AI is all through that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember sitting at an Institute for the Future roundtable, one seat away from Roy P. at Stanford, who's, great AI researcher, and his doctoral degree is in philosophy, because, they pulled the faculty together after he had earned his degree, and they said, well, take some mathematicians, we'll take you guys from philosophy, let's think about, whether we can, imitate human cognition, right? And, it's changed a lot over the years, but I said, now that we're into generative AI, the degree in philosophy actually works pretty well, doesn't it, Roy? Because the prompting and everything, you need broad general knowledge, right, as opposed to, deep subject matter knowledge to really work with the system well. So what's next? What else do you want to talk about for 15 minutes?
If anybody's going to CES, I'm doing a big session on it's kind of I designed the session in the metaverse track to be a shootout on headsets, but I changed it a little bit more about how the VR headsets are going to be, how they will evolve and impact impact the market in 2024. And I got some pretty good speakers. I got one of the top executives from HTC, from Lenovo, from Meta, and then Hugo Swart, who runs the entire XR, or the whole metaverse division for Qualcomm. And they're all GMs, and so that should be really fascinating. And that's on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. So
that should be pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I have to represent Apple because Apple wouldn't come as usual. Right. So we'll talk especially about, because I got to use the Apple headset for a while, actually more than most other people. And it really is a game changer. I got to tell you, when you put that sucker on, you literally, in fact, when I wrote about it, I said, this is the closest thing to time travel any of us is ever going to have. Because one of the things was going back to the age of dinosaurs, and I'm literally walking through a giant field, and and the stupid dinosaur comes up to me and nearly eats my head. I mean, your actual reaction was, ha, you have to get back. And there were a bunch of examples that they used in that video, but it really is staggering how Apple, I believe, is going to power the creative imagination around XR and VR. And I've been testing the new MetaQuest 3 that just came out, and I've had the MetaQuest 2, which was okay, but the MetaQuest 3 is even better. And the MetaQuest experience is not anywhere near what Apple has, but again starts to give you in the creative juices of what you're going to be able to do with this. So you can't write off, even though a lot of people are trying to write off the metaverse, they would be completely wrong to do so. That's going to have a dramatic impact on the way we eventually visualize things.
Yeah. Can you compare and contrast what you think is happening with metaverse and?
Hold on, I gotta shut this window here.
All right, go ahead. Bruce, I heard you trying to ask a question, and I will get back to you.
That's okay.
I'm sorry, Kevin.
I'd like to ask a question. I mean, this has been kind of a running dialogue between, Mike, and by the way, M2 for me means Mike McGuire, M2, he's got that, built-in handle. So anyway.
I'm now an old chip, though.
There you go. He is.
Last generation
chip
chip.
off the old chip.
Graying at the edges.
That's right. Going into an immersive experience like that versus living in a smart environment. All right. Something short of the Star Trek holodeck, but compare and contrast what you think the velocity is of needing to go into something that, is immersive like that versus making environments that are smarter.
This is somewhat the dichotomy that Apple's dealing with. In 2017, Apple introduced what was the AR kit for the developer. And right after that, I had a private time with Tim Cook, and I congratulated him because they did some really cool demos at the developer conference. And I said to Tim, I said, look, how important is AR to you? And he then told me something, and I've written about it a couple times. I didn't write everything he said, but basically he said, I believe that AR will be the greatest contribution Apple will make in its history. And given the fact that the iPhone had that amazing impact, that was an amazing statement. And one of the reasons Apple's has taken so long, because if you think about it, he started this, he made that comment in 2017, which means they started the project in probably 2014.
Yeah, I think they bought that. They bought Mateo in like 2012 or no? I'll have to go look it up.
2012, yeah. But anyway, the bottom line is he personally believes that the AR part of it is going to be bigger. But what they discovered pretty quickly, what you could do in his format, because he told me too that he thought that it needed to be in a glasses, not a goggles.
Right.
And so when they started digging into it, it took years for them to understand that the technology just was not going to be there to do AR glasses by itself. So what he did was with the Vision Pro, he's married both the immersive and the AR pass-through. And it's the pass-through that he did really well with this, because you can see everything around you. You can see the data in front of you. He's delivering what he thinks is the vision, but he's incorporating the immersive as part of it. And initially, I think that's the way it has to go.
But is it,
you've got, go ahead, Mike.
Sorry. When you're the pass-through, because I mean, I played with the Oculus, the second, third versions, or third and fourth, I can't remember. Right. And you have that ability. It's using the cameras though, right, to perceive the actual physical space you're in. Does the Vision Pro still, does it have that kind of, I'm looking through a camera kind of view of
Well, you
the
can't
real
tell.
physical?
Yeah,
Really?
you can't tell you
Because
into the camera.
you know what I mean though with the Meta one, right? Is when you go into that mode, show me the room, it looks kind of like you're looking through a 7-Eleven security camera footage kind of
Exactly.
look.
In Apple's case, remember, Apple has 15 cameras.
Yep.
And so you've got 4 just to provide the pass-through
Mhm.
imaging.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
when you put the headset on with Apple, as far as you can tell, I mean, you can't tell that the person's not there in front of you. And that's the other thing. The resolution of the headset is so high that everything looks as clear as if you were standing in front of the guy. And I had one situation where I was actually talking to one of my friends is one of the top guys in running the division. So I'm talking to Steve Sinclair, and it's just as if he and I were in the same room across the thing. And then we brought in someone who's on another part of the campus into our meeting, and I can't tell the difference. We're just all looking at each other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're
Yeah,
not reduced to cartoon avatars?
Not at all.
Good.
That's good. That's a good thing. What kind of impressed me when I heard, I participated virtually in the announcement. I'm sure you were there in person, as a ex intellectual property, executive, was the density of patents inside this single object. That was really impressive, right? How much accumulated, defined knowledge was built into this single device. That immediately set off all kinds of signals to me, because it means that they're
Yeah,
going
and that's going to
to go ahead, finish.
go ahead.
I was just
Go
saying,
ahead, Kevin.
it just means that they have the density of thought, as Jerry Seinfeld would say, talking about jokes, the density of thought in that Apple Pro device creates ongoing opportunity for them to be financially benefiting from whatever anyone else is trying to do, because they've already thought of so many of the things that they need to overcome to make it work right, the way you're describing it, Tim. So that's just
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah, the patents that they have on this thing are amazing, and they're already granted, which is even more
I
interesting.
know
That means that they put in 5-6 years ago, right?
that they're not design patents, they're utility patents, So
Yeah.
I like I said, I was impressed at that moment. I just said, oh, I'm looking for, I'm not a big fan of this stuff, all right, in terms of virtual reality. I am a pretty big fan of augmented reality. And so I'll agree with it in that space. I just don't like cutting myself off to go into a different experience. I like the both and.
Well, and again, I think you are mirroring the original thing that I discussed with Tim Cook,
Mhm.
because he didn't like that goggles mentality. The problem is, and we know the supply chain pretty well. I got to tell you, you just can't get the technology is just not there to
Mhm.
get all of that into a set of glasses. You can do there's just too many compromises to
Mhm.
try to get an AR headset or an AR glasses to where you're going to do that. Now, having said that, we know just from some sources that the third generation of this will be half the size, and eventually, and I think it's going to be more towards the end of the decade, this will get more to a glasses like concept. But it's a development road that is going to take a lot more technology breakthroughs to get that smaller.
I mean, but I'm looking parallel and saying, by the time that technology becomes available in that form, will we have already figured out through, human factors and, that we've already been able to hack into somebody's optic nerve and put a direct impulse right into your vision, as opposed to putting it through your eyes, right? I don't know, right? But it seems to me like they're on parallel tracks about, which one's going to get better first.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, that's a lot of science fiction type stuff kicked in there as well.
I know,
But
but I see a lot
well,
of
but I mean,
progress being made in terms of being able to get people's hearing back. All right.
oh, no.
And so I'm
Absolutely.
thinking
But
sight is
to
next,
get that
right?
right, but to get the level of what Apple delivers with this, even to a smaller form factor, I just think is a very tough road,
Agreed.
and I just don't see it happening until at the earliest the end of the decade. Now, having said that, look at Apple's history on how they go from, because if you remember the original iPod was actually a pretty big device
Yeah, it was.
to where it ended up before the end of the thing, before they, uh, stopped making the iPod because everything got shifted over to the iPhone.
Right.
And I have an original iPhone here in my museum, and I set that one up, connected, and stand it up next to my iPhone Pro Max, and like there's like 500 more power in the iPhone today than I had in the iPhone that I had when it first came out in 2007 or 2007.
Yeah.
So, that'll be the fun thing. The only sadness for me is that I may not live long enough to see all of this come together.
Well,
Yeah, I don't know, Tim. I mean, I think, we both all of us have been in this space a long time. The thing I still wrestle with, I mean, to this day, and more recently in the last couple of years, is it's not, what was it? Moore's law was chip density doubles every 18 months, right? Was it something like
Yeah.
that? The way those code bases are changing in the large language models makes me think it's, that the capabilities aren't doubling, they're like quadrupling in 3 months, like quarter cycles almost, it seems, right? It's moving. But to your point, as the chip density and capabilities get bigger, software gets harder and harder and harder to manage and write. So I think that's going to be that'll be it's what was it years ago, Tim, right? We were talking about the hardware things where the choke points, screens, processors, hard drives. I think we now turn to that phase where it's the software is now the choke point.
You said this before, Tim, and to your point, Mike, the energy consumption of the large language models, running at scale is really mind-boggling, right? And we need to get back to, once it's trained, do the same thing that we did for, interactive TV, was use compression algorithms to make these objects a lot smaller and run more efficiently, because just running them the way that they're trained, they're going to start competing with, do I get the electricity, or can I ask a question today? All right. Can I have a glass of water, or do I want to cool, the system? A lot of competing needs beginning to, well up, right, in terms of usage of resources.
Yeah, and W3
You think
seems to be
crypto
moving.
was bad?
Well, Web3 was supposed to solve a lot of that problems, right? Especially in the crypto space. But it doesn't seem to be moving.
No.
Well, the only thing moves slower now than software development is industry consortiums. And I think that, because that was what everybody was hoping, was that Web3 would, right, with a completely decentralized set of computing capabilities, we'd be more efficient with things like AI engines, but apparently not.
Bruce, you had a question before. Jump in.
I forget what it was now, Kevin, but
All right. We have put bright, shiny objects out there and entertained ourselves away from whatever your question was. So
it's wonderful.
All right. Well, You can tell this is like old home week. All right, we enjoy this. Did Bonnie try your Vision Pro? How'd she like it? If she did
Oh,
try.
no, only Ben and I and Carolina were able to see
Okay,
it. So.
all right. I wasn't sure whether.
I was going to say, I don't think Tim could take it home.
All right.
Probably had to do the
Tim,
demos on site or
I don't
Cupertino.
know. I mean, he has a lot of privileges. All right, but I didn't know how far they extended.
Well, I would ask
No,
Tim.
this particular one was pretty controlled, but it was the first time anybody had seen it, and I was literally one of the first they showed it to that was outside of Apple.
Right.
It just happened to be, because I've been advising them for so many years that was more of a not an acknowledgement that I think it was more of an acknowledgement that I'm old, but I got in there.
Let's make sure Tim sees this while he still can.
Yeah, I suspect, Tim, that it was a tip of the hat to somebody that they respect. That's what I
There you
suspect.
go.
I
like
Tim,
that.
yeah.
I like that explanation. That's the best one.
Yeah, I got to run, guys. So
Tim, thanks so much for being with us, and everyone,
Yeah, thank you.
be intentional. We'll talk.
all right, guys, take care.
Cheers.
See ya.
All right, professors.
All right.
I'm
We're
just
out.
an adjunct professor.
Thank you both.
Thank
Take
you
care.
for everything you do. Cheers.